This video is for the first section in audience, persona, and emoji on persona. So remember that we're telling stories to communicate to other people, and those other people are our audience. But different people are going to take different messages, even from the exact same story. We might have different interpretations, take a different moral from the story, etc. So, to be sure that we communicate as effectively as possible, we need to be specific about the audience that we're speaking to. And so, we're going to take a look today at a tool that we can use in order to help us make sure that we're communicating to the person we want to be communicating to. So, this particular tool is called a persona, also sometimes called an ideal customer profile. This is one tool that's going to help us to define, and from defining, then understand our audience. It's used in a lot of different areas: design, marketing, broadcast, film, business, branding. There's lots of different avenues where you're going to hear this brought up. The idea is that you're going to create a character, a fictional character, but that fictional character is an archetype of your audience. They're kind of like, again, this is where like the ideal customer comes in. They're an ideal version. They're going to have like the strongest traits of your audience. You build these in many different ways. The best ones are going to be based on real people. Focus groups are a great way that you can kind of figure out how your audience thinks. But no matter how you build them, you want to be thinking about certain things we call demographics, psychographics. Things like, what are the wants and needs of the person that you're speaking to? What are their interests and their values? How old are they? Are they a man or a woman? Do they live in the city or in the country? How much money do they earn? What's their job? Are they a student? What do they study? And then that helps us understand what their goals are in life and what are their pain points. What are things that aggravate them? Even if you're wanting to, say, educate somebody on making sure you don't get COVID-19. You want to make sure that you do it in a way that speaks to them in the language that they speak. Not necessarily literally, although that too, but in a way that correlates with how they identify themselves. If they go, well, this will never apply to me, they're not going to pay much attention to what you have to say. So no matter what you're communicating, it's really important to understand how your audience will or will not identify with what you're saying. So the process of creating personas, they help us create things with our audience in mind. And that helps us build empathy. That allows us to basically put ourselves into the shoes of the person who we want to communicate with. What do people actually want? Why are they paying attention to your communication? What will enhance their lives? And what challenges do they face? And that allows you to create things that actually are useful and helpful to people, and that way they're going to identify with. Here are a couple sample personas just to get you in mind of what people are interested in talking about. And these kind of come from the point of view of creating an app. So again, that's another area where people will think about the user and how they interact with what they're making. So in this case, we're going to have 3 different people who use the same educational software. So in this case, we've got Rob the builder. He lives in a small apartment with his grandmother, who's a registered nurse. Rob enjoys STEM subjects and he wants to design bridges when he grows up. He's got a mobile phone, but he doesn't have a computer at home. He'd rather draw maps and diagrams and build models than listen to lectures. So that's what Rob has available to him, and also what his interests are. Now, Rob is very confident and sometimes impatient. He can make careless mistakes and he forgets to check his work. That might be a problem with someone who wants to be an architect. So again, you're thinking about what are things that you can use to help this person. Well, the goal of Rob using this educational app is that he wants to study for a nationwide statewide math competition. And in our scenario, Rob always finishes early. So during his extra time, he makes flashcards, which is this app, of the problems he just completed. Creating the cards is fun, and it gives him a chance to check his work and find mistakes, which is important to someone who wants to go on to be an architect, who knows that maybe he sometimes makes careless mistakes, and he's trying to study for a math competition. So again, this is how flashcards, the app, is then useful to Rob, who likes to build things. Then we got Lisa the champ. Lisa's a competitive runner. She lives with her 2 parents, her 2 siblings, and 2 dogs in a 2-story townhouse. Already, we see Lisa's a little bit different from Rob. Now, Lisa plans to be a varsity athlete in high school. She dreams of a college sports scholarship. She'll often travel long hours on the bus with her team, and she has to be at school early to train. And so because of that, in class, she's often sleepy or she's physically restless. Now, emotionally, Lisa's anxious about her pre-chem course. She believes that she is, quote, bad at science and that she will never succeed at STEM subjects. Now, Lisa's goal for this app is to find more time to study while keeping up with her training. So how can this app, Flashcards, help Lisa, who's very different, as we can see from Rob? Now, Lisa's going to create flashcards after she finishes each homework problem, rather than finishing her work early. On the morning of a test, then she's going to turn on the app's audio screen reading feature and listen to her flashcards during her morning run and on the bus. So this is different. Her needs are different than Rob, who wants to check his work. Lisa doesn't have enough time to be able to actually maybe do everything she needs to do, so the audio function is really important to her. And then we've got Sujin, the farmer. Now, she's just moved to the US from Korea with her parents. Now, their apartment complex has a community garden, and she loves growing vegetables and being outside. She wants to be a climate scientist. Again, very different from Rob, who's also interested in STEM, and then, we got a student athlete. But Sujin is not going to be maybe using the audio portion, because she is hearing impaired and she wears hearing aids. Now, she's really good at math and science when she's mastered a concept, but because of her language barrier and because of her hearing issues, she finds lectures really challenging. Now, she can feel overwhelmed if the classroom's loud, and she sometimes struggles with English and feels isolated. What she wants to do is to study outdoors, and she also wants to be connected with other people. So, in this case, the app allows her to work with her classmates and have that connection, and to play games in order to learn her material. And since it has a translating feature, it allows her to then understand words that may be unfamiliar to her in her native language, and then that actually helps her build vocabulary. So these are ways in which a single app, in this case called Flashcards, that helps students with their STEM problems and their STEM questions in class might be useful to students who have very different needs, come from very different backgrounds, and have a variety of accessibility issues. So all of these were built off of a very simple scenario worksheet we see here. Now, in our last longer project we're going to work on, we're going to be trying to explain a concept to somebody. And so when we get to that assignment, we're going to be coming back here because you're going to want to think about who you're describing that concept to. And thinking about the fact that if you're working for Rob or Sujin, it's going to be different how you maybe want to explain that concept. Are you explaining it to someone who is maybe impatient, or someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of time, or someone who maybe has trouble with a physical impairment or a language, maybe English isn't their first language, or you're trying to translate something. So when we do these, we really do want to name people. It allows us to identify more with the other person that we're speaking to. And part of this is just a human thing where we build connections. And if we make it a real other person, it makes it a lot easier for us to have that empathy and to be able to really try to put ourselves in someone else's position. So we'll give them a description, like the builder or the athlete or the gardener, the farmer, and again, give them a backstory. What is it about them that sets them apart? What do they have available to them? Why do they maybe need to understand the concept you're explaining? What's their emotional state? Are they stressed? Are they anxious? Are they happy? Are they sad? And why? What would be the goal? What would they do, say, with this concept we're explaining? And so that'll help us flesh out a scenario that will allow us to communicate with them as best as possible. And these really basic steps can be used in all kinds of scenario planning and all kinds of persona creation. You can use this if you're building a brand, you can use this if you're advertising a product, you can use this if you're pitching a film. There's lots of different ways in which you can use this very, very simple tool. So I just want to close with a couple of kind of character studies and kind of looking at some specific products and how we use this in a very concrete way in, say, marketing and in advertising. So I think, again, these are things that maybe we're really used to, and so we can understand the concept better than how we're going to apply it maybe more abstractly. Now, every product that we come in contact with has a personality. And in fact, because as people, we want to like identify with other people, we actually instinctively assign personality traits to inanimate objects. We kind of have a personality we kind of assign personality traits to our phone, to our computer, to our water bottle. And we can reinforce these things through materials, through colors and shapes, and graphics. All of these things will influence our behavior, and they're going to tell us stories about the social identity that are associated with different objects. So, for example, we've got this water bottle, but another example might be sitting on my desk right now is an external hard drive. Now, I own a lot of external hard drives. Someone who works in media, has worked in media for a long time. Backing up my files is important. I've been burnt far too many times, but I also work with really large files. So I've got a number of these hard drives, and each of them is slightly different, and you could think about them appealing to slightly different people. I've got one drive that's very thin, very light, and it's about the size of my palm. Now that one is for people maybe who are on the go, who want something inconspicuous. All of my hard drives are black. I don't like things that maybe call too much attention to themselves, and I want something flashy. But I have another hard drive sitting next to me, which is chunky. It's thicker than the first hard drive. And it's made out of kind of like a corrugated metal. And it says on it in really kind of geometric type, WD_ black in all caps. This hard drive is a gaming hard drive. It's made to go with an Xbox. I don't use it for that. I like the fact that it's a really fast hard drive and that it's really durable, and because I'm kind of clumsy, but it's made for people who are maybe going to be going and playing Call of Duty with their friends and who need a lot of extra space for that. And so it appeals to a very different person than my like thin, inconspicuous palm-sized hard drive. So even things like hard drives have, one of them feels very masculine, the other one's very neutral, and even like the texture on it kind of goes for that kind of Call of Duty industrial feel. Now, in the example of the water bottle we have here, that is for a brand where they're trying to make a sustainable water bottle, which seems like a ridiculous idea, right? Some of the worst contributors to trash and excess waste are water bottles. So can a quote-unquote disposable water bottle be sustainable? Well, this particular brand tried to have people buy their water bottle but then refill it by making the form appealing enough to save. Now, does that actually help their bottom line? Presumably not. So, kind of interesting. But they shaped it like a hip flask, and they did that because there's an association with hip flasks with spirits, as in like bourbon or whiskey, and association with men, and kind of a frontier feel to it. The name, Fred, 4-letter word, it's in really solid structural type, and it's actually in a typeface that is associated with Americana, this kind of American Gothic typeface. And so everything about this water bottle emphasizes the, quote, manly vernacular of the brand, which is what Ellen Lupton calls it. So everything around it kind of has this feeling that you might get from, since I'm apparently on a video game kick, Red Dead Redemption, you might have if you had a Red Dead Redemption water bottle, maybe this would be it. So we associate these kind of feelings and emotions with these objects. Another example here is some two wireless speakers. Now, the way that I've just been talking about it, as you have a look at kind of the profile for these different wireless speakers, we often think about it in terms of products and in terms of items. I think partly because we're so used to coming in contact with these things. But it can be really useful in lots of other areas as well, especially any kind of visual field, where we want to understand characters and our audience. Think about, for example, if you're watching a movie, the objects that the character interacts with, the things in the setting, they tell us a lot about that character. And sometimes there'll be something in the scene which doesn't really seem like it fits, and it will draw attention to itself. Now, similarly, when we want someone to identify with characters in our stories or in our videos, we want to make sure that they're then using things that reinforce either character traits that we think the audience wants to see in themselves, or in case of maybe a hero, again, and a villain, things that they don't want to see in themselves. And we want to make sure that everything's kind of coherent in terms of everything reinforces what the message is. One of the ways in which to think about this in terms of like writing, James Bond, very particular. If you read any of the James Bond novels, down to the pen he uses, where he goes to get his suits, how he has things tailored, everything is very specific. Because James Bond is a very specific, singular person. And so whenever we have depictions of him, everything always, there's actually like a handbook for when James Bond is used on screen, when he's used in comics, when he's used in different things. There are certain things that you have to adhere to in order to be able to use James Bond because he's so singular. So once we understand our user, our viewer, our audience, and then we can understand their likes, their values, we can appeal to them really effectively by making sure that our characters do things that reinforce what we want them to understand. And just to tie this in a little bit, kind of a last note with our last lesson module, which was on color, thinking about how color can reinforce these things. Again, thinking about things like pink and blue. They oftentimes have very strong attachments in our particular culture with certain genders. But this isn't always the case, and it's not the case across all cultures. Now, yes, as the US kind of becomes really dominant in the whole world, has become so dominant in the whole world in terms of cultural production, we've kind of exported this to other countries. But the idea of pink for women wasn't really born until the US in the 1950s. And we've got marketers who then take advantage of this, because then we can market the same typewriter in pink to girls and in blue to boys. But it doesn't always have to be the case, and it isn't necessarily going to be the case everywhere. So just keep in mind, some of the associations that we take for granted with things like color aren't necessarily going to be true in all cases. So we're going to talk in the next set of slides about emojis and how we can use things to kind of talk across cultures, but just keep in mind that there are certain things that are more universal than others. So in the same way that we might think a pair of pink pumps are about as girly as it can get, they might be the same color as your Pepto-Bismol, which I'm pretty sure is a very non-gendered product. So just keep those things in mind as you're working to make sure that you're communicating as clearly as possible to the people you want to communicate to.